welcome to Out is the New In podcast. I am Johnny G, and I'm sitting here today with the amazing Barbara Nicholson-Brown, and she is doing amazing things in our community here in Phoenix, and I just want to thank you so much for coming here and just giving me the opportunity to hear your story.
Well, thanks for having me, Johnny G.
Absolutely.
It's a long story. It's a good story.
I love it.
I'll start with the best part is I'm going on 33 years of sobriety.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Day at a time. I'm not there yet, but right now I'm sitting steady at 32. I am a recovered alcoholic, and I never thought that I would be alive past the age of 30, I think. It was a destructive 24 years of just not feeling right, not fitting in, didn't feel the usual story that
Sure.
Most addicts and alcoholics have is we don't feel like we belong. We have a lot of times low self-esteem, and I tended to go with the crowds growing up that were the bad people, the bad kids, the ones that hung out on street corners and smoked cigarettes and, stole beer out of their parents' refrigerator. And once I took a drink, the first time I ever got drunk, I really drank. I was about 14 years old. I was I grew up in Chicago, and we had a snow day. And those were the days you didn't have to go to school, but we somehow, a couple friends of mine, we trudged to some kid's house. Went in the basement and decided to break into the parents' liquor cabinet. And that was not the first time I had alcohol, but it was the first time that, I just turned into this party mode at 14. And they had a bar that was like from floor to ceiling. And the doors weren't locked. And we opened them up, and we pulled out every bottle that we could. And creative me thought, well, let's just pour a little of this and a little of this. And so it was a real horrible combination.
Making your own little concoction.
Of everything from like scotch to cream de menthe and everything in between it. It was really sickening. And we blended it up, and it was kind of like a pasty gray, like slushy. And I just pounded it. And I remember still my head feeling like it was going to blow off. And I got hot flashes and warm, and the room was spinning, and that was about it for that day.
That's all it took.
And I recall waking up. I had passed out, and I was underneath a pool table, and it was probably 8 or 9 hours later, and I'm sure my parents were looking for me. The usual story with that, kids not home for dinner, and I don't know how I got home. But when I got in the house, I started throwing up, and my parents were not feeling sorry for me at all. They were like,
Right.
Good.
Right.
Good. Maybe you learned your lesson.
Right, thinking that this won't happen again.
And I was like, I promise I won't do this again. And, that was my first lie, my first big addict lie. And I didn't drink continuously like as a 14, 15-year-old kid, but I had alcoholism in my family. My mom was alcoholic, and there was a lot of dysfunction and chaos in my family growing up. No one talked about it. Mom's sick. Don't tell anybody outside the rooms, not the rooms, the house. And it was, when she wasn't drinking, she was amazing. When she was drinking, I hate to say this, I hated her.
Sure.
I hated what it did to her.
Right.
She wasn't my mom.
Right. It was a disease.
And it
that
was
you
like,
hated.
Yeah, it was like, who's this Jekyll and Hyde? Right. And I remember telling my younger sister, I'm never going to be like that. But, I really if I had a say in it, I don't know. You know, it's in my family genetically. I don't pinpoint like this is why. I have this. So for a good, I don't know, 24 years, from 14 to 38, I drank, I switched jobs, I switched relationships, I just kept running. I wanted to party, I wanted to feel good, I wanted somebody to save me. I did. I think I wanted a man to save me, like make my life okay. And the people that I ran with weren't people that were ever going to make my life okay. And I depended on my friends when I had them at the time. Part of my story's in Chicago. The worst part of my story's in New York, because I lived there for 10 years until I got sober. But, you know, I depended on my friends to, like, drive my car home to my apartment.
Sure.
Get me in the house, open the door, put the keys in, make sure I was laying down in bed or on a couch, not have a cigarette in my hand, flaming. And I put a lot of pressure on these people. It wasn't their responsibility to babysit me.
Right.
And I was a blamer and a victim. You know, and when people said, my friends would say to me, like in my mid-20s, I got married at 20 and we divorced at 23, and it wasn't because of my drinking. It was just because we were too young and kind of stupid, you know?
Sure.
So that didn't work out. What do you know at 20? And except we were smoking pot, and it was the early 70s, and we were drinking Ripple wine, and it was all fun. It was fun. But on my own, you know, it was like you never knew what was going to happen. I functioned, but I was also very destructive to my body and myself and my reputation and my self-esteem. And the hangovers that I experienced were those jackhammers in your head, and I swear I'm never going to do this again. And then once that wore off, and I would promise myself, you know, all right, if you go out tonight, drink water in between a drink, or every 2 drinks have a Diet Coke, or eat something, and none of the ors worked. I always usually got really screwed up within about 2 drinks. I could not hold it. And then a lot of my drinking was in a blackout, which is really frightening. It's like being in a sleepwalking or being in a walking coma, not remembering where you are, how you got there. And while you're in the blackout, while I was in my blackouts, I was at bars, I was in cabs, I was with people. I ended up in places I shouldn't have been. And, you know, I always got out alive. And so things kind of started crashing down in when I was like 29, 30. And my parents had moved out to Arizona. My brother, my older brother, younger sister were living in Manhattan. Both very well educated people. My brother went to MIT, was a graduate of MIT. My sister was going to Juilliard, the music school, and I was like the middle kid, like black sheep waist case. And my brother offered he had a graphic design firm in the city, and he said I think my dad said, you know, try to get Barb out, keep an eye on her. And it wasn't his job. So my dad was putting all this pressure on my brother. But he said, hey, move out here. You can live with Sue for a while, my sister. She had an apartment in the city. I'll give you a job. You can learn the design business. And it was back in the days before PDFs and even Macs were out. So we were doing everything by hand. And it was an interesting learning experience. Living in the city, and I was like, oh, wow, look at this. Flashy lights, never stops. Bars every 2 feet.
Right.
You know, I'm living in it. And I just thought I was it. And I really didn't know anybody besides my family. And when I arrived, they weren't really excited about the whole thing. But my sister said, okay, you can live here, but that, I had to sleep on a couch and I had a drawer and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But you can't drink and you can't bring people in here. And you don't know anybody here, so why would you bring them in here?
Sure.
And my brother was, here's the deal with the job. I'm going to train you. I was a paid intern. He paid me well. And she also worked there, so it was the three of us. So that dynamic was still going on, and it was like everybody had their eye on me. And he had simple rules. I couldn't come to work hungover. I couldn't go out to lunch and come back drunk. I had to put in my hours. I had to be diligent and thorough with what I was doing. And it was probably 6 months, and that was it. He fired me. I was screwing up. My sister was tired of, I didn't live up to, I can't, not drinking in the apartment kind of thing. So she said, you got to find a place. Excuse me. So I found a little apartment about the size of this table. I'm not kidding.
I can't even imagine.
So it had bars on the windows, and it was just, not a highlight place to live, but, it was a living room, mini kitchen, bathroom, and you could spin around and take a shower and cook at the same time kind of thing. So in my mind it was,
I love it. That's awesome.
if you lived here, and it was only $350, if you lived here, you would drink or you would try some drugs. I mean, it was like the walls were always closing in on me. And, eventually I met some friends that were not the highest level of people.
Like-minded people with you, right?
And so it was just nonstop. It was, after my brother fired me, I got into the restaurant business, which I was making a lot of money, spent a lot of money, and then I got into coke. And it's dark and ugly.
Right.
I was with a lot of people that I would never consider hanging out with.
Right.
And there's, I'm not saying they're bad people.
Right.
But they weren't looking out for my welfare, nor was I looking out for theirs. So it was, you give me this, I'll give you that. And cocaine became kind of prevalent for a while. And then somewhere in the middle of it, and it was in the mid-'80s, I had woken up from a horrible bout of drinking, and I did Quaaludes, which I don't think are around anymore, and I fell off a loft or something at somebody's apartment, and I hit the floor, but I landed on a giant stuffed animal, thank God. So I didn't break my neck.
Right.
But I was with my boyfriend at the time who had to carry me to his apartment because I couldn't stand up. And I woke up and I was black and blue on my legs from falling.
Mm-hmm.
I had the worst hangover I ever had to that date. And I said, when I came to, I said, I'm never drinking again. And he's like, yeah, right. And I didn't for about 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't touch alcohol, but I touched everything around it. Not everything. Coke and Valium and pot. So I wasn't sober, but I thought I was sober because I wasn't drinking. And then, I got into advertising, and it was kind of like a Mad Men situation office.
Right.
Everybody had bottles in their drawers, and
Right.
it was a good job. Nobody really worked hard unless we had to, but it was very Mad Men-ish. That show really hit it. What goes on? What
Right.
goes on?
Right.
What you saw really goes on. And then I got a different job down near not Wall Street. It was on Water Street for a kind of a tech company. And I don't even know how I got that job. I think through a friend. And we were making good money. We were the administrative assistants to a bunch of a sales force of guys that love to drink.
Right.
And so whenever they made a sale or closed a deal, it was like, take everybody out.
Got to celebrate.
And I was the one sitting there with a club soda. I was always with the club soda. Even though I had pockets of stuff in my, packets of stuff in my pockets and stuff. But I was dressing well, and I had good clothes, so there's nothing wrong with me.
Right.
And somebody said, hey, how come you always drink club soda? Why don't you have a drink? And I said, maybe I could have a champagne, because that's not really alcohol. It's got bubbles.
Interesting mindset.
So I did, and I didn't fall off the bar stool, and I was pretty proud of myself.
Right.
And I didn't have a craving at that moment, and then maybe another week passed, and they all went out again, and I went, and I was like, okay, I can do this. So maybe I had 2, but I was sticking to champagne. And probably the third time we went out, I don't remember how many I had. And that's how fast this disease, because it never goes away.
Right.
At the time, I didn't know it was a disease. I just thought there was something seriously wrong with me, but I wasn't going to ask for help, because then you would see what a piece of shit I am. Pardon my honesty. Even though you knew, like if you would know if you were hanging out with me that I had this problem, and maybe, depending on who the people were, I got confronted a lot. And so I didn't listen. Okay, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll watch it. Nobody said go to AA. Nobody said go to treatment. Nobody said try a 12-step group. Nobody said dry out for a while. So after those bouts with this champagne and everything, and it was my downfall, my descent into hell, I call it.
Okay.
I would go out with the group, and then I would either get a lift home, maybe, or I would take the subway home, and so I'm loopy, and I did a lot of subway riding when I was drunk or in blackouts, which I'm here.
Yep.
And then there were 2 liquor stores in my neighborhood, and I used to go to one, and then I'd go to the other the next day. And I would go in with a story. Oh, I'm having a party. I'm having a bunch of people over, and I would get a bunch of wine and whatever. These people didn't care what I was doing. They just wanted the money.
Right.
They don't care. I wasn't the only one doing it, probably. And so I was dancing between Broadway and 7th and 7th Avenue and 54th Street, because that's where the liquor stores were. I was in Midtown. And when you wake up out of a blackout and you're sitting in a closet in your own bedroom by yourself with a bottle and a wine opener, you might have a problem.
Potentially, right?
And you wake up and you look around to see who's there, but nobody's there because I was alone. And I would be like, oh my God. But it didn't stop me.
Thank you for being a part of Out as a New In podcast. Please join us next week as we continue to hear Barbara Brown's amazing personal story.